When I lifted the phone that afternoon, my heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. I was certain Max was calling to share happy news, maybe to tell me the exact wedding date. I smiled at the thought and glanced at the pale pink dress still hanging in my closet, waiting for its turn to shine. But it wasn't Max's voice that greeted me. It was Lena's, smooth, practiced, and a little to calm. "Oh, Renata," she began, her tone dipped in something that sounded like pity. "Didn't Max mention? We actually got married yesterday. It was just a small ceremony. Only our special people were there, special people." 2 tiny words, and suddenly the room felt colder. For a long second I just stood there, phone in hand, staring at the sunlight slipping through the curtains. My throat tightened, my pulse pounded in my ears. Special people. After everything I had done for them, the rent I paid, the groceries, the car repair, the endless favors, I wasn't one of the special people. The pink dress hung beside the shoes I had chosen carefully for the big day. I had pictured myself sitting in the front row, watching Max beam with pride, hearing the vows, maybe even crying a little. Instead, I was standing alone in my kitchen, holding a phone that suddenly felt much heavier than it was. I wanted to ask why. Why hadn't they told me? Why hadn't my son called? But I already knew the answer: convenience, embarrassment, or maybe just indifference. That night, the house felt emptier than it ever had. I poured myself a cup of tea, but it went cold on the table untouched. The silence was so deep it hurt my ears. I replayed every moment, the years of help, the sacrifices, the times I had said yes even when I wanted to say no. Every memory now looked different under this new light, not generosity, but naivety. A week later, the phone rang again. "Renata," Lena's voice trembled this time. "We're behind on rent. The landlord is threatening to evict us. Could you please send the transfer today?" For a heartbeat, I almost reached for my checkbook out of habit. But then I remembered. "Special people, I think you'll manage," I said evenly. After all, newlyweds should start their life together independently. There was a stunned pause on the other end. "Renata, please. We'll pay you back." I almost laughed. Pay me back. That had never happened. Every promise, every next month, had dissolved into silence. "Lena," I replied, "you made it very clear that I don't belong in your inner circle. So from now on, handle your finances without me." I hung up before she could answer. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief. The next morning, I made coffee like always, but for once it wasn't for anyone else's sake. I didn't check my phone for apologies or excuses. I sat at the table where I had planned their birthdays, calculated their bills, and quietly cried when they forgot mine. Today, that table would witness something new: clarity. I took out my old checkbook and a stack of statements. I wanted to see in black and white what my generosity had truly cost. Rent, $500.36. Months equals $18,000. Groceries and supplies, about $7,200. Gifts for birthdays and holidays, $3,000. Medical emergencies, $800. Car loan never repaid. $2,500. Furniture repairs and other little things, $1,900. Total, $33,400. $33,400. That number sat on the page like a confession. I had drained my husband's inheritance and my own savings to keep 2 adults comfortable, and they couldn't even pretend to respect me. The phone buzzed again. Max this time. Normally, my heart would leap at seeing his name. Not today. I let it ring out. Then again. Then Lena. I ignored both. A text arrived. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk." I deleted it without reading further. At 2 p.m., I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. No errands, no lists, just me. The autumn air bit gently at my cheeks. I walked through the park where I used to push Max on the swings, his small hands clutching mine as he laughed. "You're the best mom in the world," he'd said once. sticker-fingered and smiling, somewhere along the way. That little boy had turned into a man who saw me as a bank with emotions. I sat on a bench beneath the same trees and took a deep breath. The anger started to melt, leaving something quieter, resolve. I was done financing affection. Done begging to be loved the way a mother should be. By the time I got home, I felt lighter. I called the bank the next morning and cancelled the automatic transfers I had set up years ago. The clerk hesitated. "Are you sure, Mrs. Richter? You've been sending this payment every month since 2021. "I'm sure," I said. Consider it the end of a very long chapter. When the call ended, I sat quietly, staring at the pale pink dress still hanging in my closet. For a moment, I thought of taking it down, folding it away. But no, it would stay there, a reminder of the day I finally saw things clearly. Love that must be purchased isn't love. It's a transaction. And for the first time in 40 years, I decided I was done paying the price. The next morning, the house felt different. Quieter, but not lonely, a silence with boundaries instead of emptiness. For the first time in years, there were no early calls, no messages from Max or Lena starting with "Mom, could you just?" I poured myself coffee and sat by the window, letting the steam warm my face. I had expected to feel guilt, maybe even panic. Instead, I felt something simpler, space, but peace is a fragile thing. At exactly 11:15, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Max on the porch. His hair was messy, his shoulders tense. He was holding his phone in one hand, thumb flicking over the screen like he was rehearsing what to say. Behind him, Lena waited in the car, arms crossed, eyes sharp. I opened the door only halfway. "Mom," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You didn't answer our calls." I was worried, were you? My voice sounded calm, even to me. "Or were you worried about the rent?" His jaw tightened. "That's not fair. You know I've been between jobs. 3 years is a long time to be between jobs, Max." He looked down, then back up with that old boyish charm he used to use when he wanted forgiveness. "Come on, Mom. You know I'll pay you back once things get better. You always said family helps family." "Yes," I said softly. "But family also shows up. At weddings. In gratitude. In respect." For a second, his expression faltered. Then Lena stepped out of the car. "Renata," she said, walking up the path. "Let's not make this dramatic. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." I repeated. "You got married without telling me." She smiled the way people do when they're cornered. "We just didn't want to bother you with the travel." "You hate big events. That's funny," I said. Because the photos looked like quite an event. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Max shifted awkwardly. "Mom, can we come in and talk?" "No," I said. "You can say what you need to from there," he sighed, the friendly mask slipping. "Fine, we just need help for 1 more month. Lena's hours got cut. We're trying to sort things out." "I believe you," I said. "But it's not my problem anymore." His voice hardened. "You're really going to do this? After everything I've done for you?" That almost made me laugh. Everything he had done for me. "What have you done for me, Max?" I asked quietly. "Besides making me feel small in my own home." He didn't answer. The silence between us was long and sharp. Finally, Lena tugged his arm. "Forget it," she muttered. "Let her sit here alone." They walked away, the crunch of gravel fading down the driveway. When the door clicked shut behind me, I exhaled for the first time in years. 3 days passed before the next move. This time it wasn't a call, it was a knock at the window. My neighbor, Eleanor, stood there holding a small basket of muffins. I heard raised voices. She said gently, "Everything all right?" I hesitated, then told her the whole story, the wedding, the years of payments, the sudden cold silence. Eleanor listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You've been too kind for too long," she said. Kindness without boundaries turns into servitude. Her words sank in like medicine that burned on the way down that afternoon. She helped me install a small security camera near the front door, just in case, she said. It felt odd, putting a barrier between me and my own son, but also strangely comforting. The following week, letters started arriving. One was from the bank, a reminder about the account I'd co-signed for Max years ago. Another was a bill for repairs on a car I'd never driven. All in my name. I realized how deep my entanglement went. It wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial, legal. So I called the bank. The clerk confirmed what I feared. Max had defaulted on the car loan, and since my name was on it, they were coming to me next. That night, I barely slept. I paced the kitchen, the same spot where I'd once wrapped birthday gifts and baked cookies. Now it felt like a war room. By morning, I had made a decision. I contacted a lawyer, Mr. Weber, a calm man with kind eyes who didn't flinch when I told him everything. You've been a guarantor on multiple accounts, he said, flipping through my papers. The first thing we'll do is protect your assets. Then we'll send notices revoking authorization on anything that isn't yours. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Eleanor came over later that evening. You look lighter, she said, pouring tea. I admitted. Mr. Weber says I can secure the house and freeze any shared access. It means Max won't be able to take loans in my name anymore, she smiled. Good, you're finally choosing yourself. I looked around my living room. The photos of Max as a child, the souvenirs I'd bought for birthdays long forgotten. My eyes landed on one picture, Max at 10, missing a tooth, his arm wrapped around me. I took it down, dusted it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. Not out of anger, out of self-protection. That night, my phone buzzed again. A message from Max. Mom, I heard you hired a lawyer. Why would you do that? I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back just 2 words, to protect myself. And when I pressed send, I felt something shift permanently. The next storm was coming, I could feel it. But this time, I was ready. The next few days passed in an eerie calm. No calls, no knocks, no messages. For a moment, I wondered if silence could be this peaceful, or if it was just the sound of the storm gathering its strength. I followed Mr. Weber's advice to the letter. He filed all the necessary documents, froze the shared accounts, and notified the bank that I would no longer be responsible for Max's debts. The relief was immediate, but it was also terrifying. Like stepping out of a burning building and realizing your skin still smells of smoke. Each morning, I made coffee and watched the steam rise. I had spent my whole life serving others. Now I was learning how to simply exist for myself. Eleanor checked on me every other day, her gentle presence a kind of armor. Don't mistake quiet for safety, she said one afternoon, setting a plate of cookies on the table. People like them, when their source of control is gone, they don't apologize. They retaliate. I smiled at her caution, but deep down, I knew she was right. It happened on a Wednesday evening. I was watching the sunset through the kitchen window when I noticed a car parked across the street, an old silver sedan. It stayed there for nearly an hour, engine idling, headlights off. The next morning, the same car appeared again. Different time, same spot. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence, maybe a neighbor's guest. But when I looked closer through the curtains, I saw Max sitting behind the wheel, pretending to scroll his phone. I didn't go outside. I didn't wave. I simply closed the blinds and wrote down the time in a small notebook. Just as Mr. Weber had advised. By the 4th day, he wasn't alone. Lena sat beside him, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. They didn't come to the door. They didn't call. They just watched. And somehow, that was worse. 3 days later, the peace finally shattered. I woke up to the sound of fists pounding on the door. Mom, open up, Max's voice thundered through the hallway. We need to talk. I didn't move. My heart hammered, but my body stayed still. Renata. Lena's shrill tone followed. You can't hide forever. I dialed Mr. Weber's number with trembling fingers. He picked up on the first ring. They're here, I whispered. Outside my door. Don't open it, he said calmly. I'm on my way. If they refuse to leave, I'll call the police. Through the peephole, I saw Max pacing the porch, frustration twisting his face. He looked older, harder. Lena stood behind him, her phone raised, recording. Mom, he shouted again, you're being manipulated. That lawyer is stealing from you. My breath caught in my throat. Stealing. The irony almost made me laugh. Minutes later, the familiar sound of sirens broke the tension. Two police cars pulled up behind their sedan. Mr. Weber arrived just after, briefcase in hand. He spoke quietly to the officers while I watched from the window. When the officers approached the porch, Max gestured wildly. Lena cried. But eventually, they were escorted back to their car. Before leaving, Max looked up at my window, a look that wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. Like a child realizing for the first time that his mother wouldn't come when he called. When the cars pulled away, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My knees gave way, and I sank to the floor, shaking. Weber came inside moments later. It's done for now, he said gently. I'll file for a restraining order. They're crossing boundaries. Do you think they'll stop? I asked. He hesitated. People who've lived off others for years don't stop easily. But they'll learn. The next week felt lighter, as if the air itself had thinned. Eleanor brought me flowers, bright yellow ones that filled the kitchen with warmth. I started sleeping better, cooking again, rediscovering little pieces of myself that had gone missing. But deep down, I knew the calm wouldn't last forever. Sure enough, a letter arrived in the mail, thick envelope, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note in Max's familiar scrawl. Mom, I can't believe you'd humiliate us like this. You've lost touch with reality. If you keep listening to that lawyer, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. You need help. Legal action. Help. They weren't just angry now. They were planning something. I took the letter straight to Mr. Weber. He read it silently, then folded it neatly into his folder. This is coercion, he said. If they proceed, we'll counter every move. But you must stay calm and document everything. I'm not afraid of them anymore, I said quietly. Just disappointed. He smiled softly. That means you're healing. That night, as I watered the plants in my small garden, I noticed the moonlight glinting off the security camera Eleanor had installed. It blinked steadily, a small, silent guardian dot inside. My phone vibrated again. A new message from Max. You're going to regret this. I stared at the screen, then powered the phone off completely. The next morning, I would visit the bank again, and then the police. This time, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing, because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The real battle was about to begin. The following week felt like walking through fog, quiet, uneasy, full of shapes that moved just beyond sight. Every knock on the door, every rustle outside made my pulse quicken. I wasn't scared anymore, not exactly. I was alert, waiting for whatever Max and Lena would try next. It arrived on a Monday morning in a neat white envelope stamped with an official seal. I slit it open carefully. Inside was a notice from the family court, petition for evaluation of mental competency. It read, for a moment I didn't understand. The words blurred. Then the meaning hit like a fist to the chest. They were trying to prove I was crazy. I called Mr. Weber immediately. They've filed it, I whispered. They're saying I can't manage my own affairs, he sighed, unsurprised. It's what I expected, Mrs. Richter. Their last leverage is to paint you as incapable so they can control your finances. We'll respond before the deadline. I sat there, shaking. My own son wants to make me legally incompetent. Mr. Weber's voice softened. It's cruel, yes, but it's a tactic. They're desperate. After the call, I walked to the window. Outside, the garden looked the same, trimmed hedges, sunlight glinting on the fountain, but everything felt different. The safety of my own home now seemed conditional, fragile. That afternoon Eleanor came over carrying a basket of pears. The moment she saw my face, she put it down and hugged me. What did they do now? I handed her the letter. She read it, her mouth tightening. They're accusing you of incompetence? Renata, that's madness, exactly, I said bitterly. Madness must run in the family, apparently. She made tea, sat across from me, and spoke quietly. You've spent years proving your stability, keeping records, paying taxes, managing this house. You'll win this. But you have to stay calm. They'll feed on your fear. Her words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. 2 weeks later, a government social worker named Mrs. Schmidt arrived at my door. She smiled politely, clipboard in hand. Routine assessment, Mrs. Richter. I'm required to ask a few questions. Her presence felt clinical but not unkind. I invited her in, offered coffee. She looked around the living room, noting every detail, the tidy shelves, the clean curtains, the framed photographs. Do you manage your finances yourself? She asked. Double quotes, yes. Every bill, every tax, every statement. Would you like to see the files? She blinked, surprised. If you don't mind, I led her to the study, opened the cabinet, and showed her the labelled folders: taxes 2024, insurance renewal, utility receipts. Everything colour-coded. She flipped through a few pages, nodding slowly. And how do you spend your days? I garden. I read. I volunteer at the library twice a week. She looked up. You live alone? Yes, I said evenly, and I'm quite capable of it. For a long moment she just looked at me, pen hovering over paper. Then she smiled faintly. I can already tell you manage yourself perfectly well, Mrs. Richter, but I'll finish the report. When she left, I felt a rush of relief so strong it brought tears. Not from weakness, from vindication. 3 nights later, around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Renata, Lena's voice hissed through the line. How could you embarrass us like that? Telling everyone we're abusing you? Do you want to destroy our lives? I froze. I haven't spoken to anyone but my lawyer. You think people don't talk? You think the neighbors don't gossip? You're ruining our reputation. Lena, I said quietly, you ruined your own reputation when you tried to take your mother-in-law to court. There was a sharp inhale. Then the line went dead. I stared at the silent phone and realized something important. Their power had always depended on my willingness to argue. If I didn't respond, they had nowhere to throw their poison. So I stopped answering altogether. A month later, I found myself in a small courtroom. Seated beside Mr. Weber, across from us, Max and Lena looked perfectly composed, dressed neatly. Expressions rehearsed. Max wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge, a calm woman with silver hair, leafed through the paperwork. We have a petition claiming Mrs. Richter is mentally unfit to manage her finances. Supporting statements cite erratic behavior and undue influence from her attorney. Mr. Weber rose. Your Honor, my client has full documentation of her finances and medical evaluations confirming her mental clarity. The petitioners, however, have a documented history of financial dependency on her. He placed the thick folder on the bench. The judge skimmed a few pages, brow furrowing. Then came Mrs. Schmidt's testimony. She described my home, my records, my independence. Every word was a small light cutting through the fog of accusation. When she finished, the judge nodded. Petition denied. Mrs. Richter is of sound mind and capable of managing her own affairs. The gavel struck once. Bang, and it was over. Max's face went pale. Lena muttered something under her breath. I didn't look at them. I just stood, thanked the judge, and walked out with my head high. Outside, the sunlight was dazzling. I hadn't realized how heavy the air in that courtroom had been until I stepped back into the open. Mr. Weber shook my hand. "You did wonderfully. Now we'll file for legal protection, restraining orders, property boundaries, everything you need." "Thank you," I said. My voice wavered, not from fear but release. On the way home, I stopped by the cemetery where my husband rested. The grass was damp, the air smelled of rain. I cleaned the headstone, replaced the withered flowers, and whispered, "Your money kept them comfortable, love." But not anymore. I've learned, for the first time in years, I didn't hurry home to fix someone else's crisis. I just stood there and breathed. When I returned home, 3 cars were parked in front of my gate. My heart skipped. Silver sedan, dark SUV, and a small blue hatchback. Through the security camera, I saw Max and Lena, and to strangers arguing in my driveway. I didn't go outside. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Weber. "They're here again," I said quietly. "Stay inside," he replied. "I'm calling the police right now," as I watched the flashing lights approach through the curtains. I realized this fight was no longer about money, it was about dignity, and I was finally winning. The police cars stopped outside my gate, their red and blue lights flashing across the garden. Shadows flickered across the walls, familiar faces caught in an unfamiliar spotlight. I stood behind the curtain, watching as Max gestured angrily at one of the officers. Lena clung to his arm, her expression teetering between defiance and fear. To strangers hovered nearby, murmuring to each other. Weber's voice came through the phone, calm and steady. "I've already spoken to the station. Stay inside until they approach you. You've done everything by the book." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. My heart pounded, but my hands didn't shake this time. I wasn't the same woman who used to panic when the phone rang. I wasn't the woman who sent money just to avoid conflict. Not anymore. After a few minutes, one of the officers knocked gently on the door. "Mrs. Richter." "Yes," I said through the door. "Is it safe?" "It's all under control, ma'am." "May we speak with you?" I opened it just enough for them to step into the hallway. They were young, polite but firm. "Your son claims he's here to collect personal belongings he left in your house," one said. I frowned. "There's nothing of his here. He moved out 3 years ago." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "Do you mind if we check?" "Please do," I said, stepping aside. "You'll find nothing that belongs to them." They looked through each room, methodical and professional. When they returned, one of them gave a small nod. "You're right. Everything here is yours. We'll ask them to leave." From the window, I saw Max arguing again, his arms waving wildly. He looked desperate now, cornered. The moment the officers began walking toward him, he turned and shouted something I couldn't hear. Lena grabbed his sleeve, whispering urgently. Then, finally, they left. The 2 strangers followed, their faces hidden by the night. Once the patrol cars pulled away, the silence returned, heavier, but cleaner. "Do you think it's over?" I asked Mr. Weber when he called back. "It's never sudden," he said gently. "People like them don't admit defeat, they exhaust it. But they can't harm you legally anymore. Every file, every recording, every witness is in your favor." His confidence steadied me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. Still, that night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights low, sipping tea that had long gone cold, watching the faint glow of the street lamps on the garden path outside. The pink dress still hung in the closet upstairs, untouched, like a memory that refused to fade. Sometimes memories sneak in when the world goes quiet. I saw Max at 10 years old again, missing a front tooth, his hair messy, eyes full of mischief. "Mom, look. I made you breakfast," he had said once, carrying a burnt piece of toast and a glass of orange juice half spilled. I'd laughed, hugged him, told him it was perfect. Where had that boy gone? When did love become a ledger? Tears slipped down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. They weren't for him anymore. They were for me, for all the years I believed love meant sacrifice. That motherhood meant surrender, but tonight, I understood something new. Love also means boundaries. 2 days later, there was another knock, softer this time. I hesitated, then checked the camera. It was Eleanor. I opened the door immediately. "You scared me, sorry," she smiled. "I saw the police the other night. Wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine." "Better than fine." Actually, she stepped inside, handing me a small wrapped package. "Consider this a housewarming gift for your freedom." Inside was a tiny gold key on a chain. "What's this?" I asked. "A reminder," she said. "You hold the key now. Nobody else." Her words hit harder than she knew. I put the chain around my neck and felt its cool weight against my skin. Solid, real, mine. A week passed without a single call or message. For once, the silence was golden. I started spending mornings in the garden, afternoons at the library again. People greeted me warmly, and I smiled back, not politely, but genuinely. Eleanor often joined me for tea, and slowly, I began to laugh again. The laughter felt strange at first, like an old muscle remembering how to move. But peace, I learned, isn't the absence of conflict. It's the confidence that you can handle it when it comes. One morning, a letter arrived. I froze at the sight of the handwriting. Max's again. Inside, only one sentence: "I'm sorry." "Mom, I didn't know how much I'd lost until you stopped giving." There was no signature. No return address. I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the photo of him as a child. I didn't cry. I didn't call. Forgiveness didn't need to mean reunion. Sometimes peace means loving someone from far enough away that they can't hurt you anymore. That evening, I sat on the porch, the sun sinking low behind the trees, painting everything gold. The air smelled of jasmine and new beginnings. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a call, a favor, or an apology. I was just here when the breeze moved through the garden. The chime hanging above the door tinkled softly, like a gentle applause from the universe itself, and I smiled, because this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was earned. It had been nearly a month since Max's last message, the short apology that ended with silence. I'd convinced myself that maybe, finally, it was over. Then one Saturday morning, just as I was trimming the roses in the front yard, a familiar voice broke the calm. "Mom." I turned slowly. Max stood by the gate, holding a bouquet of lilies, my favorite. His hair was neatly combed, his shirt tucked in. He looked like the boy I used to know, not the man who had shouted at my door, "May I come in?" He asked, voice soft, almost pleading. Every instinct in me said no. But another part, the part that had once tucked him into bed and wiped his tears, whispered, "Just listen." So I opened the gate. He stepped inside cautiously, eyes darting around the garden as if it were a stranger's home. "This place looks beautiful," he said. "You've really made it cozy." I nodded but didn't reply. My silence filled the air like fog. He sighed. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm sorry. Truly, I lost control. I was scared. Things got complicated." I studied his face, the eyes too quick to dart away, the faint tremor in his hand. "Guilt or performance?" "Why now, Max?" I asked quietly. "What made you decide to remember I exist today?" He looked down, twisting the bouquet in his fingers. "Because everything fell apart after that court thing. Lena left. I lost my job. I just needed my mom." Those words, "I needed my mom," hit me like a gust of cold wind. Once, they would have melted me instantly. Now, they made me cautious. "Come inside," I said at last. He followed, setting the flowers on the counter. "Smells the same," he murmured. "Like coffee and vanilla." I poured 2 cups, sat across from him, and waited. He started with small talk, how quiet the neighborhood was, how work had been stressful, how he missed the good old days. I nodded. letting him circle his real reason like a vulture tracing prey. Finally, he took a deep breath. "Mom," he said, "I need your help one last time." There it was. He leaned forward, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "There's a small business opportunity, a friend's startup. I just need a little investment to get back on my feet. I promise it's different this time." I smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. "How much?" He hesitated. 10,000, the same old number. Always just enough to sound reasonable, never small enough to be harmless. 10,000, I repeated softly. "And what happens if I say no?" He looked up sharply. "Why would you say no? Don't you trust your own son?" I met his gaze without blinking. "Trust isn't about blood, Max, it's about behavior. And you've shown me exactly who you are." His jaw tightened. "You're really going to turn your back on me? After everything?" "Yes," I said simply. The shift was instant. His shoulders stiffened, his eyes darkened. "I can't believe you," he snapped. "All those years you said family comes first. What happened to that?" "I believed it," I said, "until I realized I was the only one living by it." He stood, pacing the kitchen. "You think that lawyer cares about you? You think your little friend Eleanor does? They just want your money, Mom, the same way you think I did." I stayed seated, calm. "The difference is they don't ask for it." He froze, eyes flashing with anger. "You're going to regret this." I tilted my head. "You already said that once." It didn't age well. For a long moment, he just stared at me, breathing hard. Then he slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. "You've changed," he hissed. "I grew up," I said quietly. "You should try it." At that exact moment, the front door opened. Eleanor stepped in, holding a tin of biscuits. She stopped cold when she saw Max. "Oh," she said lightly, though her eyes stayed sharp. "Didn't expect company." Max forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just visiting my mother. Catching up." Eleanor set the tin down. "Good, make sure it's only catching up." He glared at her. "You don't have to protect her. She doesn't need protection," Eleanor said softly. "But it's nice to know someone's watching when old habits come back." The air between them crackled with unspoken truth. Max muttered something under his breath, then stormed toward the door. Before he left, he turned to me. "You'll miss me when I'm gone." I met his eyes one last time. "I already do, Max, but not the man you've become, the boy you used to be." He didn't answer. The door slammed, and the sound echoed like thunder rolling through an empty valley. Eleanor exhaled slowly, then looked at me. "Are you all right?" "I am," I said, surprised at how true it felt. I didn't even flinch. She smiled. "That's how you know you're healing." We sat together quietly for a moment, listening to the distant hum of cars outside. Then she said, "He'll try again, you know. People like him don't stop at no, they stop at indifference." I nodded. "Then I'll give him plenty of that." Later that night, I found the bouquet of lilies still sitting on the counter. I picked them up, beautiful, flawless, but scentless, artificial, a perfect symbol. I tossed them in the trash. Then, standing by the window, I whispered to the quiet room, "Love without respect is manipulation." And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, only peace. The battle wasn't just over. It was won. For a few weeks after that confrontation, life felt peaceful again. No messages, no visits. No shadows parked outside the gate. I started to believe it was finally over, that maybe, after so many years, Max had realized I couldn't be broken anymore. But some people don't vanish quietly. They linger like echoes, finding new ways to haunt you. One crisp morning, I received a call from my bank. "Mrs. Richter," the woman said politely, "we just wanted to confirm a wire transfer request you made for $25,000 to an account in Berlin." My heart skipped. "I didn't request any transfer." There was a short silence on the line. "The authorization came through an online form signed with your name. We froze it because it didn't match your usual login pattern." My stomach dropped. Can you send me a copy of that request? Of course, ma'am. When the email arrived, I stared at it in disbelief. The signature, my name, was forged perfectly. Even the writing style matched the way I filled forms. But the email address used wasn't mine. The sender's name? Max Richter. I called Mr. Weber immediately. He listened quietly as I explained, then said, "They've crossed into criminal territory now. This isn't manipulation, it's fraud. What should I do?" "Let them walk into the trap themselves," he said. "The bank already has the timestamp and IP address. If it matches theirs, we'll have evidence strong enough to press charges." My hands trembled. Not from fear, from anger. For years, I'd cried over his indifference. Now I was furious at his arrogance. "You think you can forge my name and take what's left of me?" I whispered to the empty room. "Not anymore." That evening, I told Eleanor everything. She listened silently, her eyes dark with fury. "You need to protect every account," she said. "Change passwords, freeze your credit, lock your credit card. Don't give them even a window." I smiled weakly. "Already done, Mr. Weber's handling the rest." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Good, but, Renata, brace yourself. When people like that get caught, they don't apologize. They retaliate." I nodded. "Let them try." 2 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Mom, Max's voice came through, shaky and desperate. "Please don't hang up. It's not what you think." "What is it, Max?" I said coldly. He stammered. "The money thing, it was Lena's idea. She said if we transferred it first and explained later, you'd understand." "I see," I said quietly. "So you were going to steal $25,000 and then explain." "It wasn't stealing." He snapped. "It was borrowing. You owe me, after everything I've been through." That sentence, "you owe me," snapped whatever fragile thread of patience was left. "Max," I said slowly, "I don't owe you another breath. You took my kindness, my money, my peace, and twisted all three into weapons. This call is being recorded. If you contact me again, it goes straight to the police." He cursed under his breath. "You're sick, you know that. You've let that lawyer turn you against your own family. Goodbye, Max." I hung up. Weber called later that afternoon. "The police confirmed it," he said. "The forged transfer came from Max's personal laptop. They've issued a warrant for questioning. You'll be protected from any involvement." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, "It's over." "Yes," he said gently. "But it's also justice." That word, justice, tasted new in my mouth. For years, I'd begged for peace. Now I had something better, closure. That night, I walked through the quiet house and paused by the piano in the corner. It hadn't been touched in years. I ran a finger across the keys. The first note came out soft, dusty, like memory. Max used to sit beside me there, swinging his legs, humming off-key. "Play the happy song again, Mom," he'd say. So I did. But this time, the song sounded different, sad and free all at once. Halfway through, tears blurred my vision. Not for Max, but for the woman I used to be. The one who believed love meant survival. The one who kept forgiving without realizing forgiveness without change is just permission to be hurt again. The next morning, Mr. Weber came by with a folder. "You might want to read this," he said. Inside was a document stamped by the district attorney's office. Case file, Richter versus Richter, forgery and fraud attempt closure. Below it, a line that made me smile through the tears. No further action required from the victim. All accounts secured. I looked up at him. "Victim," I repeated. He shook his head. "Not anymore." That evening, the sunset spilled gold across the garden. I carried a small box outside. Inside were the last physical pieces of Max's chaos, old iOS, apology notes, and faded photographs. I placed them in the fire pit, struck a match, and watched the flames curl upward. The smoke smelled like release. Eleanor stepped outside, her voice gentle. Letting go, I nodded. Finally, we stood there in silence, watching the papers turn to ash. When the last ember faded, I whispered, "Love isn't about saving someone else. It's about saving yourself before you disappear." And as the wind carried the ashes away, I knew, this time, the story really was mine. The next morning, the world felt different. Not because anything outside had changed. The same clouds drifted across the sky. The same birds perched on the garden fence, but something inside me had shifted forever, for years. My mornings began with someone else's needs. Rent payments, reminder calls, worry lists. Today, I made my first list for myself. It wasn't about chores or bills. It said, take a long walk without a destination. Buy a new book, something beautiful, not practical. Smile at strangers for no reason. Remember, you are not anyone's backup plan. I pinned the list to the fridge and felt something warm rise in my chest. Freedom, fragile but real. I decided to volunteer again at the library. The same place where I used to shelve books quietly, pretending I wasn't lonely. This time, I walked in not as the woman who needed distraction, but as the woman who had survived. The librarian, a kind woman named Clara, looked up and smiled. "Renata, it's been so long." "I'm back," I said simply. "And this time I'm staying." As I stacked the books, I realized how much I'd missed this, the gentle order of it, the way stories waited patiently to be found again. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped in someone else's drama. I was surrounded by beginnings. Later that week, Eleanor showed up at my door carrying a small box wrapped in gold paper. "Before you ask," she said. "It's not another key," I laughed, a sound that came easily now. Inside the box was a small silver pendant shaped like a phoenix. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It reminded me of you," she said. "Burned but not broken." I blinked back tears. "You've been my anchor, Eleanor," she smiled. "No, Renata. You've been your own anchor all along. I just reminded you where the chain was." We hugged. It was the kind of quiet, grounding hug that says more than words ever could. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail, this time with a government seal. My stomach clenched, expecting trouble again. But when I opened it, I froze. It wasn't from the court. It was from the Social Welfare Office. Inside was a short note. "We're reaching out regarding a volunteer program for elderly mentors. We believe your experience could inspire others. Would you be interested in joining our senior guidance network?" I sat back, stunned. Me, inspire others. Then I smiled. Why not? Maybe my pain had a purpose after all. Maybe someone out there needed to hear that survival wasn't just possible. It was beautiful. 2 months later, I was standing in a small community center, speaking to a group of women, some widows, some mothers, some young and uncertain. I told them my story, not with bitterness, but with truth. "How many of you," I asked, "have ever loved someone so much you forgot who you were?" Hands went up. Dozens. "And how many of you thought saying no made you cruel?" More hands. I nodded. It's not cruelty. It's clarity. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to close the door that keeps bleeding you dry. The room was silent, except for quiet sniffles. One woman stood and said softly, "You gave me courage." I smiled through my tears. "You already had it. You just needed permission to use it." Weeks later, I took a trip I'd always postponed, the seaside town my husband and I had dreamed of visiting. I checked into a small cottage overlooking the waves. No schedule, no responsibilities, just me and the sound of the ocean. That first morning, I walked barefoot along the shoreline. The water was cold, but it felt like a baptism, washing away the old, leaving behind something stronger. I whispered into the wind, "I forgive you." "Max, not for you, for me," and the sea answered with a soft crash against the rocks, like applause from the earth itself. When I returned home, everything felt lighter. The walls that once held echoes of arguments now carried laughter again. Mine. I bought a small desk by the window and started writing. Not about pain or loss, but about rebirth. Eleanor visited often, bringing flowers or pastries. Sometimes we didn't even talk, we just sat, reading in comfortable silence. Weber dropped by one day to deliver final paperwork. Everything's officially closed, he said. You're completely free, I smiled. Freedom suits me, he nodded. It looks good on you. One evening, I lit a candle on the porch and watched the stars bloom across the sky. I thought about how strange life is, how sometimes the people who break you are the ones who unknowingly set you free. I whispered into the night. Once upon a time, I lived for others. Now I live for myself, and that's the happiest ending I could have imagined. The candle flame flickered. And for a brief, perfect second, I could swear it bowed, as if the universe itself was saying, finally. It began with a letter. Not from Max, not from lawyers, from a stranger. Dear Mrs. Richter, I watched a recording of your talk at the community center. I've been in the same place, giving everything until there was nothing left. Thank you for reminding me that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors we choose to lock for peace. With love, Amelia. I read it twice, then a third time. Somehow, the words reached a part of me that even the sea hadn't touched. For years I'd spoken into silence. Now, silence was speaking back. A week later, Clara from the library called. Renata, she said, someone from Live Today magazine wants to interview you. They heard about your mentoring work. I laughed, half embarrassed. Interview me? I'm not famous. They said they want a story about courage that looks ordinary from the outside. Something about that line stuck with me. I agreed. The journalist, a young man named Daniel, arrived the next morning with a notebook and a voice recorder. He was respectful, gentle, the kind of listener who makes you feel seen. I don't want a tragedy story, he said. I want the moment you decided to stop being afraid. That moment, I said, smiling, wasn't dramatic. It was just quiet. I looked at a bank statement and realized love shouldn't come with receipts. He chuckled softly and wrote that down. When the article came out, it wasn't about fraud or betrayal. It was about rebirth. The headline read, "The woman who chose peace over obligation," within days. Messages started flooding my mailbox, letters from women, men, even teenagers who'd felt trapped in someone else's expectations. One wrote, "Your story saved my mother." Another said, "I finally left a toxic job after reading about you." Every message was a reminder. Pain can bloom into purpose if you water it with truth. When I showed the magazine to Eleanor, she grinned so wide her tea nearly spilled. "See," she said, "I told you the world needed to hear you." I laughed. I thought the world was done listening. The world never stops listening, she said. It just waits for the right voice. A month later, a local radio station invited me for a live conversation about resilience. The idea terrified me. A microphone, a studio, people listening, too exposed. But Mr. Weber encouraged me. "You've already faced worse than an audience," he said. So I went, under the studio lights. With headphones pressing softly against my ears, I told my story again, but this time, I told it with laughter between the scars. At one point the host asked, "Do you regret helping your son all those years?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I regret not teaching him sooner that help isn't endless. We all must learn to stand, even when no one is holding us up." When the interview ended, the producer whispered, "That line. It'll stay with people." 3 days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, a photo, Max as a boy, standing beside me at his first piano recital. On the back, a single sentence, "I'm sorry, Mom, I really mean it this time." No signature. No contact information. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, feeling neither anger nor joy, just a quiet acceptance. Some apologies don't need replies. They just need to exist. I placed the photo on the piano. right where the light from the window could reach it. Not forgiveness, not rejection, just closure. Soon after, the community centre asked if I'd mentor a group of young adults from difficult homes. At first, I hesitated. Then I remembered Amelia's letter and said yes. The first session was awkward. They looked at me like I was another adult waiting to lecture them. So I began differently. "I'm not here to fix you," I said. "I'm here to remind you that you don't need fixing." A girl in the back raised her hand. "Then why are we here?" "To learn how to stop apologizing for surviving," I replied. Something in the room shifted. By the end of the session, they were laughing, sharing, and for the first time, I realized I'd found something even stronger than peace, purpose, that night. I sat at my new writing desk and opened a blank notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Dear Renata, you didn't lose a son. You lost a shadow that followed you too long. And in the light that remained, you found yourself." I closed the notebook and smiled. For years I'd written checks to keep others afloat. Now I wrote sentences that kept me whole. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the garden, I poured 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for the woman I used to be. "I made it," I whispered. "We made it." The chime above the door tinkled softly, and in that delicate sound I heard it, not applause this time, but gratitude. My story had once been about loss. Now it was about legacy. When I lifted the phone that morning, my heart didn't race the way it used to. There was no dread, no waiting for demands disguised as conversation. Just the soft hum of the line and a gentle voice that carried something I hadn't heard in years. "Peace, Mrs. Richter," the woman said. "This is from the Voices of Courage Foundation. We've chosen your story for our annual Resilience Award. We'd love for you to speak at the ceremony next month." For a second, I couldn't speak. The last time a phone call had changed my life, it had shattered me. This one was putting the pieces back together. After hanging up, I stood by the same window where everything once began, sunlight spilling over the pink curtains, dust dancing in slow motion. Back then, that light had looked cruel, too bright against heartbreak. Now it felt like a warm hand resting on my shoulder, whispering, "You made it." The pink dress still hung in my closet. I'd never worn it, never thrown it away. For years it symbolized rejection, a reminder that I wasn't one of the special people. Today, I took it down. Not because of a wedding, but because of a promise to myself. I laid it across the bed, smoothed the fabric, and smiled. I wasn't saving it for anyone else anymore. I was saving it for me. The event was small, intimate, set inside a historic hall that smelled faintly of polished wood and hope. I stood backstage clutching my notecards, heart fluttering, not from fear, but from awe. When they called my name, the applause filled the room like thunder. I walked to the podium, the light soft on my face, the microphone waiting like an old friend. "Good evening," I began. A few years ago, I answered a phone call that broke my heart. Tonight, I'm answering one that healed it. A hush swept through the audience. I used to think love meant never saying no. I used to believe forgiveness meant allowing people to hurt you twice. But I learned something. Saying no isn't unkind, it's honest. And sometimes the bravest form of love is self-respect. Someone in the front row wiped away tears. I took a deep breath and smiled. Pain doesn't destroy us. It introduces us to the version of ourselves we were always meant to be. When I stepped down from the stage, people stood and clapped. Eleanor was in the front row, eyes shining. Mr. Weber sat beside her, nodding proudly. In that moment, I didn't feel like a victim of the past. I felt like the author of my future. That night, after the ceremony, I returned home. The house felt alive, not with echoes of shouting or silence, but with warmth. I placed the award on the mantel beside the photo of Max as a child. The phone buzzed once. A message. Unknown number. Just one line. "I saw the article about you, Mom. I'm proud of you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled, a soft, forgiving smile. I didn't reply. Some stories don't need sequels. They just need peace. The next morning, I made coffee and opened the window wide. The garden glowed gold beneath the rising sun. Birds darted between the roses. The air smelled of dew and beginning. I sat at the same table where, years ago, I'd once broken down in silence after that first cruel phone call. Now I lifted my cup and whispered to the woman I used to be, "You were strong." Even when you didn't know it, and somewhere in that quiet morning air, it felt like she whispered back, "You finally came home," as the clock ticked softly in the corner. I looked around my house, no longer a cage of memories, but a cathedral of survival. That's when I realized the truth. The story had never been about loss. It was always about becoming. When I picked up the phone that day years ago, I lost my place in someone else's life. But when I picked it up today, I found my own.